Your attic temperature on a July afternoon probably reaches 140 to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. The roof surface itself can hit 190 degrees. All that heat radiates downward through your ceiling into your living spaces, forcing your air conditioner to run constantly just to offset the thermal bombardment coming from above. A $25 roll of aluminum-faced radiant barrier stapled to the underside of your roof rafters in an afternoon of DIY work can reduce attic temperatures by 30 to 50 degrees and cut your summer cooling bills by 17 to 32%. The physics is well documented through NASA research, originally conducted for spacecraft thermal management. The installation is simple enough that any homeowner comfortable with basic tools can complete it in one weekend. The materials are available at any building supply store. The payback period is typically one summer of avoided cooling costs. Yet most American homes have no radiant barrier in their attic, and most homeowners have never heard of this technology despite its documented performance and trivial cost. The concept behind radiant barriers is simple. Heat transfers through three mechanisms: conduction, convection, and radiation. Conventional insulation materials like fiberglass, cellulose, and foam address conduction and convection well, but do relatively little to stop radiation. Radiation is the process by which heat energy travels through space as electromagnetic waves, without needing air or solid materials to carry it. The sun heats the Earth through radiation across 93 million miles of vacuum. The same physics heats your roof from above, and your roof then radiates that heat downward into your attic, where it radiates into your ceiling and then into your living spaces. A radiant barrier interrupts this radiation transfer. It reflects roughly 95 to 97% of radiant heat back toward its source. When installed on the underside of roof rafters, a radiant barrier reflects heat from the hot roof deck back toward the roof rather than allowing it to radiate down into the attic. The reflected heat warms the roof deck slightly, but escapes back through the roof more easily than it would descend through a radiant barrier into the attic space. The net effect is substantially cooler attic temperatures with correspondingly reduced heat flow into the living spaces below. NASA originally developed radiant barrier technology for spacecraft thermal management during the Apollo program. The Apollo lunar module used multiple layers of aluminum-coated plastic to manage extreme temperature differentials in space. The technology proved so effective that subsequent research extended it to terrestrial applications, with residential radiant barriers emerging in the 1970s and becoming widely available through commercial channels by the 1980s. Materials used for residential radiant barriers are simple. Typical products consist of aluminum foil, usually 99% pure aluminum with very low emissivity, bonded to a craft paper or woven polyethylene substrate for mechanical durability. Some products are single-sided with reflective surface on one face only. Others are double-sided with reflective aluminum on both faces. Perforated versions include tiny holes to allow moisture vapor transmission, while still providing effective thermal reflection. The $25 figure represents roughly 500 to 750 square feet of basic single-sided radiant barrier, enough to cover the underside of roof rafters in a typical attic of an average American home. Higher-end products with double-sided aluminum or improved substrates cost 1.5 to 2.5 times as much per square foot, but offer only modestly better performance. For most residential applications, the budget-tier products deliver performance essentially equivalent to premium products, making the basic materials the cost-effective choice. Installation involves stapling or taping the radiant barrier to the underside of roof rafters, with the reflective surface facing downward into the attic space. The airspace between the radiant barrier and the roof deck is critical to performance. Without the air gap, the barrier would simply conduct heat rather than reflect it. The minimum effective air gap is roughly 3/4 inch. Standard rafter depth of 2 by 6 lumber provides ample air gap when the barrier is stapled to the underside face of the rafters. Coverage should be continuous across the entire roof area above the ceiling plane. Any gaps or missed areas allow radiant heat transfer through those locations, degrading overall performance. Take time to cover corners, gable ends, and awkward access points where the barrier installation is tedious but important. The total installed area for a typical 2,000 square foot home runs 1,500 to 2,200 square feet of radiant barrier depending on roof complexity. Beatrice Volkov, a home energy auditor working across the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area has measured before and after attic temperatures on 214 radiant barrier installations over the past 11 years. Her documented average temperature reductions are 34 to 48 degrees Fahrenheit in mid-afternoon during peak summer heat. Attics that previously peaked at 150 to 165 degrees now peak at 110 to 125 degrees. The cooling load reduction passed through to the living spaces below typically translates to 20 to 30% reductions in summer air conditioning electricity consumption. Her typical client spends between $60 and $180 on materials and 3 to 6 hours of DIY installation time, achieving annual cooling savings of $280 to $560 depending on home size and climate. The performance benefit varies significantly by climate. In hot sunny climates like Texas, Arizona, Florida, and the Deep South, radiant barriers deliver dramatic performance improvements because peak solar radiation creates the greatest opportunity for interception. Homes in these climates routinely see 25 to 40% reductions in summer cooling costs. In moderate climates like the Mid-Atlantic and Midwest, benefits are substantial but smaller, typically 15 to 25% reductions. In cool climates like the Pacific Northwest and northern New England, radiant barriers still provide cooling benefits during summer months, but the smaller magnitude of cooling demand limits the absolute dollar savings. Edwin Achampong installed radiant barriers in his 1,740 square foot ranch home in Memphis, Tennessee. During spring 2022, he documented the project on a home improvement blog with detailed cost and performance data. His materials cost was $110 for approximately 1,800 square feet of radiant barrier plus staples, tape, and minor supplies. Installation took about 5 hours across one Saturday afternoon, mostly working in the attic with headlamp and respirator due to the heat and dust. His summer electric bills subsequently dropped from the previous year's average of $340 per month across June through September to $240 per month across the same months. Annual cooling cost savings of approximately $400 gave him a payback period of 100 days, with an expected material lifespan of 30 to 50 years. The winter impact is essentially neutral. Radiant barriers don't prevent downward heat transfer as effectively when the heat source is interior rather than solar, because the temperature differential driving radiation is smaller in winter. During winter, most heat loss from a home occurs through conduction and air infiltration rather than radiation, so radiant barriers don't significantly affect winter heating bills either positively or negatively. The summer-focused benefit is the primary reason to install radiant barriers. And in heating-dominant climates, the payback analysis is dominated entirely by summer cooling savings. The integration with existing insulation matters. Radiant barriers work alongside conventional insulation, not as a replacement for it. A home with inadequate ceiling insulation and a radiant barrier will still have high cooling costs because conductive heat transfer through the ceiling will still be substantial. The optimal approach combines adequate conventional insulation, typically R38 or higher in the attic floor, with a radiant barrier on the underside of the roof rafters. The combination produces cooling performance substantially better than either approach alone. Dust accumulation on radiant barrier surfaces reduces performance over time. Aluminum surfaces covered with dust lose much of their reflective capability, since dust absorbs radiant heat rather than reflecting it. This is why proper installation orientation matters. A radiant barrier stapled to the underside of roof rafters faces downward and generally stays relatively clean because dust settles rather than clinging to the surface. A radiant barrier laid horizontally across attic insulation faces upward and quickly accumulates dust that degrades performance within a few years. Always install radiant barriers with the reflective surface facing downward into the attic airspace. The moisture management issue deserves specific attention. Radiant barriers are typically moisture-impermeable materials, meaning water vapor cannot pass through them easily. In climates with cold winters, moisture from interior living spaces can rise into the attic and condense on the underside of cold roof surfaces. If a radiant barrier prevents this moisture from continuing upward through the roof and evaporating outside, moisture can accumulate between the barrier and the roof deck, leading to condensation, mold growth, and eventual structural damage. Perforated radiant barriers with controlled vapor permeability avoid this problem by allowing moisture vapor to pass through while still providing radiant reflection. In cold climates, perforated products are essential rather than optional. Now for the obstacles to broader adoption. Several real barriers prevent radiant barriers from being installed more widely in American homes. First, awareness remains low. Most American homeowners have never heard of radiant barriers despite their documented performance. Contractors rarely suggest them during roof replacements or other attic work. Utility company energy efficiency programs sometimes include radiant barriers but often don't prominently feature them. The information gap keeps many homeowners from even considering the option. Second, attic access is difficult in many homes. Attics with limited access, low headroom, or extensive storage can make radiant barrier installation impractical for typical homeowners. Professional installers can navigate these constraints, but typically charge $4 to $8 per square foot for installation, substantially increasing total project cost. Third, roof complexity affects installation difficulty. Homes with complex roof geometries involving dormers, hip roofs, and multiple intersecting planes require substantially more material cutting and installation time than simple gable roofs. The added complexity can transform a simple weekend project into an extended undertaking. Fourth, the heat exposure during installation is significant. Attics in summer reach temperatures that present genuine safety concerns for installation workers. Most DIY installers wait for cooler weather or work in early morning hours to avoid heat stress, but this adds scheduling complexity that discourages some homeowners from following through on planned projects. Fifth, existing insulation can complicate installation. Attics with substantial blown-in insulation have access challenges as installers need to traverse the insulation without creating compressed pathways that reduce overall R-value. Working over existing insulation requires plywood or cardboard temporary walkways and careful movement to avoid damage. Despite these challenges, the simple economics of radiant barriers make them one of the highest return energy improvements available to American homeowners in cooling-dominant climates. The combination of low materials cost, relatively simple installation, and substantial performance impact produces return on investment ratios that few other home improvements can match. Winston Okonkwo, a building science consultant working out of Atlanta, has documented 68 professional radiant barrier installations at residential properties across Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. His aggregate performance data shows average annual electricity savings of 1,800 to 3,200 kilowatt-hours per installation, translating to $240 to $480 in annual cost savings at typical regional electricity rates. Total installed costs averaged $680 for professional installations covering typical home sizes. Payback periods ranged from 18 months to 3 years, depending on home characteristics and climate specifics. His documented installations have operated for up to 11 years at the time of latest monitoring. With consistent performance across the full monitoring period, the environmental impact deserves noting. The cooling energy savings from radiant barriers translate to reduced electricity consumption and correspondingly reduced electrical grid emissions. A typical installation saves 1,500 to 3,000 kilowatt-hours per year, avoiding roughly 0.6 to 1.2 metric tons of CO2 emissions annually depending on the local electricity generation mix. Across the 30 to 50-year expected lifespan of the barrier material, cumulative emissions avoidance ranges from 20 to 60 tons of CO2 per installation. The climate benefit per dollar invested is substantial compared to many other residential climate interventions. The installation sequence for a DIY project works best when planned carefully in advance. Start by measuring the total roof area that will be covered, accounting for rafter spacing and roof angles. Purchase materials with 10 to 15% overage to allow for cutting waste and mistakes. Wait for a cool morning to begin installation, ideally starting at dawn and finishing by mid-morning before attic temperatures become unbearable. Bring adequate lighting including headlamp and supplemental work lights. Wear long sleeves, work gloves, and dust mask or respirator for protection from fiberglass insulation and dust. Install the barriers systematically starting from one end of the attic and progressing to the other, maintaining continuous coverage without gaps. Tape seams where adjacent pieces meet to maintain thermal integrity. Special attention should be paid to penetrations through the roof plane. Chimneys, plumbing vents, bath fans, and other penetrations create gaps in the barrier coverage that allow radiant heat to bypass the installation. Cut radiant barrier material to fit around these penetrations, as closely as possible, taping edges to minimize gaps. The recessed lighting question deserves specific attention. Older homes with recessed lights that aren't rated for insulation contact cannot be covered by radiant barriers without creating fire hazards. These lights need to be replaced with modern IC-rated or airtight-rated fixtures before installing radiant barriers above them. Some homeowners use retrofit caps that enclose the fixtures in heat-resistant housings compatible with adjacent radiant barrier installations. Addressing lighting fixtures during planning avoids complications during installation. The compatibility of radiant barriers with various roofing materials deserves attention. Installations work equally well beneath asphalt shingle roofs, metal roofs, clay tile roofs, and most other common residential roofing types. The roofing material above doesn't interact with the radiant barrier because the barrier operates in the attic space below the roof deck. However, cool roof coatings applied to the exterior of roof surfaces can reduce some of the thermal stress that makes radiant barriers valuable. Homes already equipped with white or reflective exterior roof surfaces see smaller additional benefit from radiant barriers because less heat reaches the attic in the first place. Homes with dark conventional roofing see the largest benefit because their attics receive the most radiant heat load. The performance degradation pattern across decades of service is gradual. Radiant barriers installed in the 1990s and monitored through the 2020s typically retain 70 to 85% of their original performance after 30 years of service. Dust accumulation, minor oxidation of the aluminum surface, and occasional physical damage from attic activity account for most of the performance loss. Replacement is rarely justified because the remaining performance still delivers substantial benefit, and the cost of removing old material and installing new material exceeds the incremental benefit of fresh installation. Most homeowners get 40 to 50 years of useful service from a radiant barrier before any replacement consideration becomes relevant. The synergy with attic ventilation improvements deserves mention. Adding radiant barriers alongside improved attic ventilation produces combined performance better than either improvement alone. Radiant barriers reduce heat loads on the attic, while improved ventilation evacuates remaining heat more efficiently. Ridge vents, soffit vents, and in some cases powered attic fans all contribute to the cumulative effect. A homeowner considering multiple attic improvements should address them together rather than in isolation, achieving substantially greater comfort and efficiency improvement than the sum of individual contributions might suggest. Consider what a simple aluminum foil can do for your summer electric bill. A material costing $25 to $150 reflects roughly 95% of the radiant heat that currently passes through your attic into your living spaces. Your air conditioner currently working overtime against 160-degree attic air above your ceiling would be fighting against 115-degree attic air instead. That 45-degree reduction in the driving force for heat transfer dramatically reduces coolant demand. Your electricity bill drops. Your air conditioner runs fewer hours, extending its useful lifespan. Your home feels more comfortable because less heat radiates downward through the ceiling. And all of this for materials that cost less than a single month's summer electric bill in most homes. The technology is proven. The physics is clear. The materials are cheap. The installation is achievable for most homeowners in a single weekend afternoon. The benefit is substantial and lasts for decades. Few home improvements combine such low cost with such significant return. Radiant barriers represent one of the most underutilized, cost-effective improvements available to American homeowners in hot climates. A single productive afternoon of work reduces your cooling bills for the remaining life of your roof. That's an improvement worth making. The resale value impact of radiant barriers is modest but measurable. Home appraisers and buyers increasingly recognize radiant barrier installations as premium features, particularly in hot climates where the energy benefit is most pronounced. Disclosure of radiant barrier installation during property sale can support $500 to $1,500 incremental valuations in many markets, with larger impacts in utility cost-conscious buyer segments. The disclosure also shifts buyer expectations about operating costs, which can speed sale timing and support listing prices. Combined with direct operating savings during ownership, the total lifetime financial impact of radiant barriers exceeds pure operating cost analysis. The interaction with cooler outdoor air during nighttime hours deserves brief mention. Many hot climates experience substantial nighttime cooling, with temperatures dropping 15 to 30 degrees from daytime peaks. Homes can take advantage of this cooling through whole house fans, or passive ventilation strategies that bring cool nighttime air through the home. Radiant barriers work synergistically with nighttime ventilation strategies by reducing the residual daytime heat that ventilation needs to remove from the home. The combined effect of radiant barriers plus nighttime cooling ventilation can eliminate most air conditioning requirements in moderate hot-dry climates. Look up at your ceiling on the next hot afternoon. Above that ceiling, right now, is a space reaching 140 degrees or more. Above that space is a roof baking in direct sunlight. Between those surfaces, a simple aluminum foil barrier could be reflecting heat back toward its source and keeping your living spaces dramatically cooler. The infrastructure to hold that barrier is already in place. The rafters are already there. The attic space is already there. All that's missing is the aluminum foil itself and a stapler to attach it. $25 of material and an afternoon of work stand between you, and substantially lower cooling costs for the rest of your time in that home. NASA figured this out while engineering spacecraft to survive the vacuum of space. Homeowners can apply the same technology to survive summer afternoons in Texas, Florida, Arizona, or anywhere else American summers exceed tolerance. One small decision, made once, reduces an ongoing cost permanently.